Welcome to Is Your Audio Sound? Installment 1, Sound Like Who? This is a podcast for people doing audio in church. The ideas are relevant in all sound applications, but the words and examples I will be using are mostly from the church context. I'll try to avoid using technical jargon and use everyday words in an attempt to make what seems complex a little easier to understand. I'm really aiming this at you, the person who was slowest to put their hand down when volunteers were sought for the sound team. Knowing what all those knobs on the mixers do, or how to play with all those controls on your iPad, is of little help if you don't have a framework to guide you. I have observed many tech heads who can sprout words like gain, parametric, gate, and compressor, but if you ask them, how should it sound? A lot of them struggle to provide an answer. So my first question is, how should it sound? I've been doing, thinking and talking about sound for decades, and I'm quite convinced that we need to know what we are aiming for in order to achieve it. I also find it quite useful to be able to explain our goals in the simplest terms for a few reasons. Number one, if we know what we're trying to achieve, we can always refer back to it. And number two, if we know what we're trying to do, we can explain it to others. One of my earliest observations is that everyone has an opinion on sound. So that second reason is a good tool to have in your backpack. If we know what we are trying to do, we can explain it to others. So when Martha says, I can't hear the Bible reading, you can say, I want it to sound like I'm sitting with Amy in her lounge room listening to her read the Bible. This is intimate, and I don't want the congregation to feel like they're being shouted at. Then, of course, once Martha walks away, I can think to myself, Martha's hearing is obviously not as good as mine, and I may then choose to turn it up a little. And when Jerry says it's too loud, you can say, I'm comfortable with the volume because I can hear the people around me singing. So to flesh that out a little, my version of how should it sound comes in two parts. For spoken word, so for prayer, Bible reading, interviews, the message, the sermon, all those kind of things. And then secondly, music, often referred to as praise and or worship. But in this context, people up front playing instruments and singing with the desire to encourage the congregation to sing with them. So let's start with the first one, the spoken word. The core is simple. I want it to feel like I'm sitting in a comfy chair in someone's lounge room listening to a good story. Some of the nuances are that I want the listener to have a posture of leaning in to hear the next sentence. I want the voice I'm hearing to be the person I just spoke to in the foyer as I walked into church. I'm aiming for a natural sound, what the speaker sounds like in person, not honky and not hollow and not sibilant. Think cymbals. Again, I'm aiming for a natural sound. I don't want to feel like I'm being yelled at. I don't want distractions like feedback. That's the slight ringing off the end of words. No weird cracking or splatting. As an absolute must for your spoken word microphones, always hear them through your system before the congregation is in the room. Yes, that's every time you use them, preferably with the person who's up front today. This is particularly important with headset and clip-on microphones due to their physical fragility and audible fiddliness. You want to make sure they are actually working and sound good, just like the person who's speaking. Because like I mentioned a moment ago, we don't want distractions. But I'm going to dedicate more time to these microphones and their uses in another installment. But while we're at it, any audio from other places like words to screen, computers, video replays and audio sources all need to be pre-tested. What is important here is to listen to them all through your system before church starts every time. Oh yeah, and another thing, if you're recording, check that before church too. So let's go back to how should music sound. But before I do, a quick sidebar. The sound people in your church, that's you, need to be trusted members of the music team. For example, if Amanda plays the best intro ever on her kazoo and her microphone is off, it's all for naught. In a later instalment, I'll flesh this team idea out, but the mustard seed is that you are part of the band. So back to music again. The core idea is really pretty simple. What's the most important instrument in our church music context? I would contend that it's the congregation. The music team's role is to encourage us all to sing, and to do that we need to be able to hear ourselves and the people around us. Here are a few details to consider in helping the congregation joining in our singing. Often, one or more singers are singing melody. This is the tune that we generally want the congregation to sing. And others are singing harmony. You can ask the singers who is doing what before church. The melody should be gently prominent. Figure out which instrument is carrying the melody or helping us sing the melody right now. No, not in the last song. This is often your keyboard, piano, or an acoustic guitar. What instrument is keeping us in time? Most obviously it's drums, but a bass, a strumming guitar, or the left hand of the keyboard player are all serious contenders for this role. Once you have the basics under control, a useful trick is to look at each instrument or singer in turn and just listen. Can you hear what they're doing? Is it too prominent? Should it be in the foreground or the background? So these things form the basis of your mix. Other things are going to add in as layers, but that conversation is not going to fit in these 10 minutes. A connected way to think about sound things is that there is a difference between sound reinforcement and amplification. This is a fairly nuanced thought, but I like to think of sound reinforcement as the listener not realizing there is a sound system between the person speaking and my ear. You'll realize that this idea aligns comfortably with me listening to the spoken word from my comfy chair in that lounge room. It relates to both the volume and the tone, and tone includes things like treble, bass, hollow, boomy. As discussed earlier, it needs to sound natural. It also relates to some physical attributes. Where can I hear the sound coming from? The person is speaking directly in front of me, but the sound's coming from my left. We often can't control direction of the sound as our systems are installed, and that's a topic for another episode. But we can control the way it sounds. In turn, I think we see amplification as heading towards the concert vibe, but we do see it in our church context, as it is obvious that the singer is louder than the singer could achieve without a sound system. I think amplification surpasses simply making things louder. And I feel amplification really comes into its own when we go to a live music event and we can get that being swept off our feet sensation that comes with our stomach feeling that kick drum and our heart beating in time with the music. It's part of the entire sensation, often paired with dull hearing for the next few days. How we use amplification in our church is very personal and church specific. For me, I like hearing the congregation sing, but please think about it and know where you and your church leadership stand on this one. Maybe you ask your team lead or church leadership to listen to this installment and then catch up for coffee to discuss it with them. A final thought. Doing sound is never set and forget. Preachers often increase volume as their sermon crescendos, and in most churches your band is a group of musicians who come together on Sunday, not really a band. Volumes will vary as the feel of the music changes. A piano sound on the keyboard is probably louder than that pretty string sound they used in the third song. And Rhonda might sing the melody in the first song, but then Jacob sings melody for the rest of the morning. When Angela prays, she eats the microphone. And when Peter reads the Bible, he social distances himself from the lectern microphone. Most of these things are going to happen without anyone being conscious of them, but you, the attentive sound person, with practice will notice and compensate for each in your stride. That's the magic of what we do. So there we are. The Sound Like Who installment is done and dusted. In other 10-minute installments, I will debunk some jargon, discuss what goes where and why, and consider how we interpret and communicate with the musical members of our team. But until that day comes, I will go and warn the darkness that the light of Jesus Christ has overcome.